The Memory Corridor.
Hello Assassins, Gustav, also known as Gargudon here, and for the first time in a while, welcome back to the Assassin's Creed podcast, The Memory Corridor. As always, this podcast is hosted by me, and for each episode I have a guest with me who will be discussing a topic regarding Assassin's Creed with me. Today, for episode 5, we are going to be discussing Assassin's Creed Protagonists worthy of sequels, and for this discussion I am joined by Mr. Irakli, also known as McHeisenburglar. Say hi, Irakli.
Hey, thanks for having me, Gustav.
And Mr. Irakli here is the man behind all my channel GFX and the logo for the podcast here. And I actually haven't thanked you for that in semi-person, I guess, in a way. So thanks for that.
It's fine.
Absolutely.
No problem.
Yeah. Now, just to those who might not know that much about you, Irakli, tell the audience a bit about yourself and the things you do here in the AC community.
So, hi guys. My name is Irakli, but I mostly go by McHeisenburglar online. I joined the AC community around 2 years ago, just under 2 years ago. And since then, I've worked on just a couple major projects, most notably the Assassin's Creed Marathon, which I do graphic design as well, just regular planning for. And since then, I've also joined the admin team on the one scheme before. I do graphic design work, sometimes videos, and I've been the main video editor and designer for the Bureau podcast, which was, a thing a couple months ago.
Yeah. So as you can hear, Irakli's a pretty cool guy, and he does some awesome things. And to you frequent listeners of the podcast, you know that Call 96, admin of the ones who came before, is a pretty good friend of mine, and he has been on the show twice before. So it's awesome finally having some more members of that awesome community here on the show. So yeah. And should you be interested in staying up to date on some of these things Irakli does, link to his Twitter will be in the description below, and just like all the other episodes on my channel, really, as he is the graphic designer, so nothing new there, really. But now, without further ado, it is time to kick off the topic discussion of the day, so let's just get right to it. So, the Assassin's Creed franchise has introduced many different protagonists throughout the last 10 years, some more badass than others, and then there are some that are just more interesting than others in terms of their personality. Now, I know the topic intros usually are a little longer than these 2 lines they are here on my paper, but I honestly think that this is a topic that speaks for itself, and therefore there isn't a lot to say. Other than today, me and Irakli are going to be digging deeper into which AC protagonists are worthy of a sequel or some kind of expansion, and what makes a good protagonist in an Assassin's Creed game, with more on top of that. So just before we kick this off, do you have anything to say or ask?
No.
Alright. So with all intros and such out of the way, let's for the first time in about 3 months get back to this topic discussion. So the first question I have for you is, if you could see one Assassin's Creed protagonist return as a, in parentheses, playable character in a game, who would it be and why?
Oh, I've thought about this for a while, just being a fan of the series. And an obvious answer might be Edward, as he's one of the most beloved characters in the series, but the reason I'm not going to pick him is I think they nailed his story in one game almost perfectly, so I probably don't actually want to see any more of that character. The one I am going for now, for one of my picks, is Shay from Assassin's Creed Rogue. Anyone in the Assassin's Creed community can agree that Rogue is one of the most underrated and funded games in the series, and Shay had the best story in years, probably the best since Ezio. I think Rogue deserved at least a dozen sequences with the story that they had, and between what happens in the main story of Rogue and the sort of like the Helix Rift, I'm not going to get into much spoilers, I think there's a lot of room for a good Shay complete Templar story.
Absolutely. And I've also talked about this on my channel a few times before, and I also, to those of you who might have listened to that, I did a live stream podcast about 2 weeks ago from when this is being uploaded, discussing Edward Kenway, so I'm not going to get too much into him, but I definitely think Edward, I would love to see, maybe it already exists and I'm just not aware of it, but I'd love to see maybe just a book of some kind, to perhaps fill in the gap, those 13 years between Black Flag's ending and his death. But as you said, Shay Cormac, and I also discussed that on the first episode ever of this podcast. I would love to see Shay and Connor return, and they are also from around the same time period. So seeing them in a game together would be ideal, I think.
Right.
As a follow-up to Assassin's Creed 3, kind of to maybe even see Connor, but I wouldn't necessarily see Connor as a playable character then, but maybe Connor's apprentice or something, and Shay is like the main threat.
I remember 2 years ago when there were like huge links and like proof that Connor was going to be the protagonist of Assassin's Creed Unity. Like everything lined up for him to be in France during that time, and at the time I thought it would have been like a perfect sequel for Connor to expand his character, but also go to a new location. That didn't work out, but since then, I mean, we got Shay, which is even a better character than Connor, in my opinion.
Yeah, I can agree here and there with you on that, but I definitely think even though Ezio, let's just get to him. It might be he's probably everybody's favorite assassin, including mine. But I think we've had our dose of Ezio, and they nailed his story perfectly throughout the 3 games he was in, where he was a playable character, and also just everything else, the books and
the movie,
Assassin's Creed Embers, Embers, stuff like that. So I wouldn't be sad if we were never to play as him again, but I wouldn't complain either.
Yeah, same here.
Maybe just like a short DLC sequence in a future game or something.
But when it comes to Assassin's Creed characters, Ezio is probably not the first I'm thinking about when it comes to sequels, just because he got so many of them.
Absolutely not. I mean, 3 games alone in itself is awesome, and following him as he gets older and everything, it was awesome. But yeah, I'm thinking Connor and Shay Cormac are the ones I would definitely love to see expanded upon, and maybe even there. Now, you also mentioned it, France. Maybe even if there was a game set after AC3 with Connor and Shay in it, you might as well throw Arno in there as well.
Right. There was a project in the Assassin's Creed community called Assassin's Creed Legacies, which I sort of helped out on, and it was kind of like a fan fiction where all 3 of those characters met and they resolved their differences. It was written by 2 friends of mine, and if any of you have the time, do check it out. I think it was like a really interesting and really creative project.
Yeah, I saw there was a trailer for that, like made in Unity, right?
Yeah.
And then I think I might just have scrolled through the pages once.
It's on the Assassin's Creed Universe YouTube channel.
Yeah, they were
cool enough to get the trailer done. Yeah.
I never read it full out, but I think I scrolled through the pages once.
To be honest, neither did I, but I know that it's good enough.
But yeah, that's it.
Do you have any other characters when it comes to sequels?
I mean, that may be where I'm not that familiar with all the characters, but let me think.
I mean, off the top of my head, Evie and Jacob.
I was just about to say that.
Yeah, those are beloved characters. I think they could get some more games, more.
Or just some kind of more stories, I guess. Because I'd love to see how they handled, the modern world. I know already in 1868, the world was already becoming modernized there, but also as we got into the 20th century, everything changed there. I'd love to see how they handle that.
Absolutely.
And then I'd also love to see maybe how they relate to assassins in around World War One, as we already kind of also saw in Syndicate with Lydia Fry. I'd love to see perhaps their story training her as she grew up, because they were the ones who trained her, Lydia.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they were. I would love to see, as they got older and perhaps even up until their deaths, kind of like Assassin's Creed Embers, maybe a little short film. I'd love to see that. Maybe after Jack the Ripper DLC up until their deaths in, let's say, in the 1930s or something.
Right.
Because, and actually just staying on that track, does Jacob lose an eye in the Jack the Ripper DLC, if you know about that?
I'm actually not sure. I haven't looked into it, but I think he does.
Yeah.
But I also sort
I've seen some pretty cool fan art, like, after that, hidden blade and an eye patch on one eye.
I think it's pretty clear that he does lose an eye, but I don't know for sure, though.
Or Jack just beat him to shit, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. But in that final scene, he did look like he had like one eye open. It was.
That is huge speculation. Let's just say he didn't wear like an eye patch with the like a strap around the head, but just like something that was in the eye. How badass could that have looked?
Yeah.
Maybe like
agreed.
the Rook's logo or something, like a little round metal plate with the Rook's insignia or something.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, sure.
Look badass.
Totally. Speaking of Lydia, though, even though she's not a protagonist, if Ubisoft ever decides to make World War I or like an early 20th century game, they have like the perfect story and character set up, and they just need to go with Lydia and just create more stories for her, because I think she was really interesting in Syndicate, and we do like really need more of her and that time period.
We do, definitely, and I'd love to see her. I mean, she was a character that she caught my interest when I played this sequence. Just like the looks of her and the outfit. I really like how they went for this kind of 19 early 20th century British look of the outfit, and I was just like, who is she related to? Because she looked familiar like the second I saw her. She looked incredibly like Evie, I think it was. So yeah, she was a character that caught my interest. And staying on that track, actually, I want to get to my next question, which is, what makes an interesting Assassin's Creed protagonist, in your opinion?
I think it's less about the protagonist or the character and just the story that they follow in each game.
Absolutely.
And some of the best stories in Assassin's Creed have been ones with good character development. It's less about, I think, motives and end results, but just how a character changes throughout the story. And just great examples of this are Altair in Assassin's Creed 1, as well as Black Flag. I mean, Black Flag's story was amazing because of what sort of character Edward started out as, and how much wisdom he got throughout the game, and how different of a person he was by the end of it.
That's it. You know, I've also talked about a bit about this on episode 3 from October I did with Y24 Room from Assassin's Creed Universe. We also talked about what makes a good Assassin's Creed story there, and this kind of relates to it. And I remember I said there that I think the great stories, and that way the great characters, lie in the stories where the character is driven by something personal. And that's also where I just want to relate a bit. It just came to my mind. Watch Dogs 1 and 2, just to stay on the Ubisoft track. I know, have you played both of those?
I played the first one.
The first one.
So I haven't played
maybe I shouldn't get into to the second one in terms of spoilers.
Sorry, you're cutting off a bit.
Maybe I shouldn't get into the second one in terms of spoilers then.
I mean, you can talk about it deeply if you want.
It's just... Alright, completely spoiler free, I'm just gonna say, the Watch Dogs 2 story, it was great, but it didn't really feel personal the same way the first one did. We can agree the story in the first one, it was really personal for Aiden.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
For sure.
And I must say, it might be the second one, Watch Dogs 2, in terms of gameplay and options and open world and all that stuff, is much better. But I must say, in terms of story, the first one gets the platinum medal here, from my point of view. And I simply just think that is because, it was, Aiden was finding the persons who murdered her little niece, or his little niece. And that just taught me that much more. That's also where I guess now that
that's a good way of thinking about it. I do have a counter argument to that. Would be, for example, in the Assassin's Creed series, we have a story like Connor's, for example, which is very driven by things that happened to him personally, the death of his mother and village, and so on. But then we have stories like Assassin's Creed 1, as well as Syndicate, which is more driven by the Assassin's Creed Brotherhood and the characters' involvement in it. Yeah. And personally, I prefer Altair's or the Fry Twins story arcs to Connor's, and I think they are better written, and I think they're just better characters in general, even though Connor does have that personal motivation. Yeah. So it could go both ways, in my opinion.
I guess that's actually interesting you say that, because I thought, for example, the Fry Twins story, it was really a happy ending. Let's say it like that.
Yeah, and it really was.
I must say, you also said compared it to Brotherhood, and that's exactly it. I think Brotherhood story, it was great and everything, but the
No,
final
I'm sorry.
mission.
I compared it to Assassin's Creed 1, Altair story. And
You also
Creed
mentioned
1.
Brotherhood.
No, I meant the Assassin Brotherhood in the games.
Oh, absolutely.
Not the game
okay, sorry.
Brotherhood.
But Assassin's Creed Brotherhood,
fine, yeah.
I think the Brotherhood story, it's great and everything, and it has some epic missions and stuff like that. But in the end, I think the story, it ends in a way that just kind of isn't like really personal for Ezio the same way Assassin's Creed 2 and Revelations is.
It's really not an AC2. AC2 story is far ahead of Brotherhood in my opinion.
Absolutely, but to be completely honest, I prefer Revelations in some ways.
Yeah.
As that,
I actually agree.
It's really the closure. I love, just how Ezio, he's an old man and everything, and he had no idea this journey to find infinite wisdom would also take him to the love of his life. I really just love how they handled that. And also, just speaking of Brotherhood again,
go ahead.
I also think one of the things Brotherhood kind of didn't get that didn't build that strong was the fact that it's said that Cesare is Ezio's nemesis, but I'd say Rodrigo is much more nemesis than Cesare, to be honest. I don't think it's
within that story. I actually agree because Ezio is driven towards the hatred of Rodrigo much more at the start of AC2 than he is at Cesare during Brotherhood. I mean, Rodrigo, I think, was the better antagonist of the two.
And even might just be me, but even some of the antagonists he encounters in Revelations are like messing that much more with Ezio's personal life, as they threaten to kill Sophia and stuff like that. I don't remember their names. There were so many. There was that guy you fall off the cliff with, Prince Ahmed, and there was that fat guy, and just there were too many in Revelations.
I do have to mention though, both Revelations and Black Flag. I mean, people agree they have some of the best stories. It's a good idea for a story and a good story arc is one thing, but executing it is completely different. And one of the reasons Revelations and Black Flag have such good stories is because Darby McDevitt was working on the story. He wrote it himself, as well as the Assassin's Creed Embers film. And we've had stories like Arno's, which on paper was supposed to be really good and was supposed to be sort of like Ezio's, but sort of different. But they didn't get the right people on it, and I think they really failed to deliver a strong story with Arno.
I haven't seen the entirety, or I haven't gotten to experience the entirety of his story yet, as I have yet to play Unity. But from what I know, it is a personal story, with him and Elise and the ending and where Elise dies and everything and.
It is.
The air balloon scene.
Personally, I don't think it should have been, but just for that time period. But even if it was, it could have been much better in my it could have been.
Are you lagging out, or is it just me?
Oh, just end.
Oh yeah.
My sentence. I will mention one thing though. A good friend of mine, Lawson, he's an enthusiast in screenwriting and stories and whatnot. And one of the things he brought up when we were talking once is the difference between Ezio's story and Arno's story. I know you haven't played much of Arno's, but I won't even get into spoilers. But a big thing that drives the Edward story is they show you instead of telling you. And the example he brought up is Arno and Elise have this relationship in Unity, and it cuts from them being, children to them being adults, and the game telling you that they're in love and they have this sort of flirtatious relationship, but it doesn't actually show you when you compare it to Ezio, who meets Christina and Caterina and Sofia. The game shows you how a relationship is built between those characters.
Yeah, definitely. I know what you mean. Yeah. I guess to conclude this question, I guess just to make it an interesting protagonist, it just needs to be the character just needs to have something personal that drives the story. That's really it. And I also guess have a love interest throughout the game, perhaps.
Not necessarily, but
not necessarily, but actually, just if we lay out the facts, we've seen Connor. I guess from what I've heard, Connor isn't necessarily a character you are over impressed with.
No.
And I guess Connor, he's also a lonely guy. Let's just say it like that.
Even Edward, on the surface, looks like he's driven by riches and becoming like a well-known pirate. At the core and like on the inside, it is driven by his love for Caroline? Yeah.
Caroline.
You see flashbacks.
Yeah.
And even his story is driven by love.
Yeah.
At one point or another.
Also got into this on my Edward Kenway live stream 2 weeks ago. That's also it. Throughout his adventures, he encounters several women. He has feelings for Mary Read and Bonnie too, I guess. And of course Caroline Scott from way back before he even set sail.
Right.
He just wants to do what's best for Caroline and him. But then things they escalate a bit. Let's say it like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, the protagonist needs to be driven by something personal. All right. If you don't have anything to add to this, let's get to my third and final question for you.
Go for it.
All right. If you were to come up with your own Assassin's Creed protagonist, try to describe him or her, and there's completely free game here. Nationality, time period, anything. Completely free game.
Okay.
Should I start?
I wasn't really expecting this one. Yeah, you can start if you have any
I
ideas.
would love, just because of also my my love for that country in general, I would love to see an Irish assassin, actually. It may sound random, but I'd like to see that. I'd also just love to see maybe an Assassin's Creed game set in Ireland, because I think there are some beautiful landscapes which could make for like an incredible map, and I just love to see perhaps the Irish culture represented in an AC game. Perhaps at around the time of Black Flag, between maybe the 7 Years' War or the Golden Age of Piracy and the 7 Years' War. That could be great. And maybe have the assassin, something really, his name is something really Irish, I guess, Sinet or O'Donovan or something O'Reilly. That could be interesting.
Also, Darby, the writer of Black Flag, he himself, when asked what setting he would like for a future Assassin's Creed, he has said that he's like really big on Ireland and setting a game there if they ever do it.
Yeah.
Like he'd be like really happy to work on it.
Yeah, it could make for an amazing map, like kind of like we had in AC3. We had the cities, and then we had the outskirts of Pennsylvania and stuff. You have Dublin maybe, and then as the city, and then if you travel a bit, you have like these amazing cliffs and everything, and kind of like we saw in the frontier.
Right. I don't know much about Ireland, but
absolutely,
that does sound really good.
Yeah, and if this assassin was then related to some we've seen before, maybe Rona Dinsmore or some character from Black Flag.
Right. Yeah.
After maybe Edward, he returned to London. He became a legend. Amongst maybe this assassin is like the son of of someone who was connected to Edward in the West Indies. That could be interesting, but I just don't know.
Sure.
I just don't know if it will make a great story. But I guess that that takes time to think about, and isn't just invented in a matter of seconds. Yeah.
Do you want me to go for mine?
Absolutely.
Okay. So firstly, like, the setting doesn't really matter in my opinion for a character. I've wanted an AC set in Georgia, my home country, for years, and there's evidence that it's actually possible, and it makes sense. But I'm not really gonna get into the setting because I haven't thought about it much. But the idea I have for a character I've had for years, ever since they announced Unity, is I haven't played much of Watch Dogs 2, but from what I understand of the main idea of the story, I would have loved to see in Unity during that French Revolution a Marcus sort of story where it's just a young rookie assassin with a couple of his friends sort of reigniting the fight in the Assassin's Creed Brotherhood and starting the French Revolution on their own. I want a story that isn't driven by love or redemption anymore, but just more coming out on top, working, with friends and building relationships, building a brand new brotherhood in a new setting. It doesn't really matter. I mean, we could have any other revolution storylines that have happened in history, but just something where it's, starting from scratch, a rookie assassin sort of, teaming up with a couple of his buddies, that's just an idea I had, and I really wanted them to go for something like that in Unity instead of like a Romeo and Juliet storyline.
Absolutely. I don't know why, but just when you said it, revolution and a young boy and everything, the story of Le Miserable came to my mind for some reason.
Oh yeah.
And I guess actually
same period.
Yeah, they could make, not necessarily in the revolution, as we've kind of already seen that, and I guess that would be plagiarism. But it could be interesting to see perhaps a story, a boy maybe in Georgia who's accused of a crime he didn't commit, and he takes the fight up against the Templars.
Yeah, I mean, the
concept.
I won't get to it much because I actually have other ideas for how I want to share the story, but there are so many interesting time periods even in Georgian history, and one of them being around a couple years before the events of Syndicate, so it's still like a modern day, storyline about Georgian people rising up against oppression and Russia, and then later the Soviet Union. That there's really potential for a good story set in the capital and set at the heart of this so-called revolution.
Yeah. I'm not familiar with the Georgian history, but it sounds interesting. And actually just thinking about the area and everything, and you said the Russians and everything, that could relate to the rumors we've heard about Assassin's Creed 1389.
Right.
If you saw those with Serbia and everything, kind of just that Eastern European area.
And one more setting
interesting
that we could just throw out there. I mean, I would love a mid 20th century game, or even early 20th century, either in the U.S. or in Germany, or World War II. All those could make really good stories if they're handled properly, in my opinion.
Could. I just think the risk is, and I also think I've said this a few times before here on the show, I just think going after World War I is a bit risky, perhaps. In terms of how modern the game is, but hey, who am I to judge?
The risk is getting the history correct, because I remember when Syndicate was coming out, they said that because it's so modern in terms of its time period, that they had to make up every single assassination target, because descendants of the real people are still living today and would be offended by the events that happened in the game. I remember when Syndicate was coming out, Ubisoft themselves said that because it's so modern and set in such a modern time period, that they had to make up all the assassination targets and a lot of the historical characters, because descendants of people from that time are still living today and would be offended by events happening in game. And that could be even more dramatic if you do it about World War II, when it's only a couple of generations ago.
That's interesting, actually. I didn't know that about the descendants. Where did you read that?
It was a couple months before Syndicate was coming out. There were facts videos and so on. There were articles about Ubisoft saying, none of these assassination targets are real. We had to make them up. You will only see maybe allies as historical characters.
I actually didn't know that. That's interesting. I also remember, around the time Syndicate came out, I was just reading for fun a bit, and I also remember, I was also just wondering, the Assassin's Creed stories, they usually jump in time, and sometimes they take place over almost 3 decades, like Assassin's Creed 3 to 29 years, and I was just why doesn't it do that, the Syndicate story here? Why is it only set in the span of a few weeks or months or stuff like that?
Yeah.
And then I was also reading just with Charles Darwin and everything, who was a real character. He died in 1870. So I guess just Syndicate, it was a tough time making that game. Yeah. From what I can hear.
Ubisoft really picked the perfect year for the game, because they could pick a time where all the historical characters and events sort of overlapped, where the characters could meet all of them, and it could be like the broader,
From what I know,
game.
like with the you said with the assassination targets, most of those were fictitious. From what I know, the only one who was real was Lord Cardigan, is his name? You murder in the who you assassinate in the Houses of Parliament.
Right. Yeah.
He was real.
Yeah, but that was probably maybe real. I'm not completely sure.
Yeah, but other than that, I'm pretty sure
Crawford,
Steric was fictitious.
Whatever.
Lucy
I
Thorne.
don't remember the names.
I actually don't know about Maxwell Roth, but he was probably fictitious as well.
Maxwell was such a good character. If I just quick side note, I loved sequence 8 of Syndicate. Just the way they handled his story and him with Jacob was just fantastic. I just had to say
absolutely.
that.
Absolutely. But that's interesting, actually. That's also what you think. Getting into this whole thing. And that's where Assassin's Creed is. Has sparked some controversy here and there. Is the whole historical setting, and also in the description, in the like the first thing you see when you start up a game. This is a work of fiction and was produced and written and produced by that and that. Also, one of the things I recognized with Syndicate, there they had changed the description. There it said like different sexualities and gender identities and stuff like that.
Right.
And I think that also relates to Ned Weinert and also just the modern world. Today. It's interesting. Like, it's a really good question.
The change.
Yeah, and I also.
I remember the change being directly connected to Ned being like the first transgender character in an Assassin's Creed game before, ever.
Yeah, and I don't want to get into politics here on the show, but looking at the modern world today, transgender and the sexuality,
rightness.
Attracted to the same gender, something that is pretty controversial nowadays, and it's interesting. Also, just around the time Syndicate was released and everything, and it's interesting. And I also just think that is where it's a risk, perhaps going after World War One, or even just into the World Wars, as I think that would probably spark a lot of controversy. Like Ubisoft would see a shitstorm just like flying in on their faces.
Right.
I really think, also you said with descendants, perhaps if there are descendants of Hitler or something like that, they would. I also just think Hitler, he's not one of those historical characters to be messed with.
Plus, he wasn't killed by assassins per se, at least according to our history.
According to our history, that's right. Who knows if it was the secret.
Yeah.
I don't think so, but
one thing I will say though, I think World War II is, as you said, a bit too modern. But World War I, I think, could be like the furthest they could push it. And one of the things I loved about one of the games in 2016, in a world of like futuristic shooters, when EA went back to World War I for Battlefield 1, and they pulled off like an incredible game, like historically accurate, and was just really fun to play. Assassin's Creed could really seize the opportunity,
I guess,
and make a World War I game as well.
And I guess it could be they could make kind of a modern Assassin's Creed 3. I would love to see that, perhaps. I think it could work. World War I is, the technology, there were airplanes and stuff like that, but, the technology wasn't superior. You still used, broadside cannons and stuff like that in the war with gunpowder and everything. And like, I even think there were some people that still use muskets. No, I don't think so. But,
even use swords, I think.
Yeah, the technology wasn't superior at all. That would be interesting to see said there. But other than that, I think it still works, like the modern time periods. It definitely works for, like small sequences, also the Helix Rifts in Unity and World War I and Syndicate. And that's also where I think they could push the limits and maybe take it into the Vietnam War or some of the more modern wars, maybe.
Yeah. Well, in Unity and Syndicate, the Helix Rifts were sort of somewhat connected to the actual the games in Unity. It was Arno doing all the parkour stuff, and in Syndicate it was Jacob's granddaughter. I would love in just the next Assassin's Creed, wherever it may be said, to just have random small Helix Rifts on completely different characters in completely different time periods and locations.
Absolutely. And also, guess that's just it. Like the whole Helix rift thingy, I would love to see more of that. Maybe even it popping up completely random, as you play or something. That could be interesting. So kind of as a conclusion to what we're discussing here, I guess they won't want to go further than World War One in terms of like full game history. But it could work. World War II and stuff like that could still work for like these smaller missions. And also it's really interesting what you said with Syndicate, that they had to make it much more fictitious. And that's also just it. I think, if they make things too modern, and they have to consider things like making stuff offensive and stuff, they're really taking a risk. And Assassin's Creed,
and they're going to lose the history.
Assassin's Creed kind
less of history.
It kind of takes a shit on its own concept, if you can say it like that. Because, Assassin's Creed, is famous for having, like, so many real-life characters. I remember I was playing Black Flag, and then I read, holy crap, all of these are real? Charles Vane, Jack Rackham, and Bonnie? I'm just like, what? And also just Assassin's Creed 3, Thomas Hickey, all those British generals you murder.
And all the events.
All the events, too, yeah.
Battles,
the Battle of the Chesapeake and stuff like that. And it's just that, in Syndicate, it was much more fictitious. Not saying it was bad at all. Syndicate is like the best one since Black Flag, undoubtedly. But it still kind of just loses its sting. And I guess the only characters that are real, if they go into the modern world, are like the good guys. The ones you play with in the London Stories missions.
The ones you don't kill.
Yeah, Darwin, Dickens, Alexander Graham Bell,
Marx,
Queen Victoria, Karl Marx. Those people, the great minds of that era. It's interesting. That might be a topic for another episode. All right. So just kind of to conclude to the question in general, if you were to see your own character, you would love to see one set in Georgia, and I would love to see someone set in Ayr in Ireland, I guess. Right. So that is all the questions I have for you. Now, do you have any questions for me?
Yeah, I actually do.
All right.
Now that it's March, we're sort of getting close to an official Assassin's Creed announcement. It might come out this year or the year after.
Yeah.
I was just wondering what your thoughts were on the current rumors, like the ones that have been online for months, about Assassin's Creed Empire and Assassin's Creed set in Egypt and Next Slave. What are your thoughts? Do you like the idea? Do you want them? Would you like for them to have gone for something different? What are your just general thoughts on that?
I've also talked about this, not on my own show here, but on a good friend's show once, I talked about that. And I'm personally not that fond of the Assassin's Creed Empire rumors, to be completely honest. I think going way back is a risk. And it's just not set, doesn't suit the Assassin's Creed thingy. Like, because that's the thing, I think, also in terms of technology that you have in game, it will be very, very limited. Because, even in Assassin's Creed 2, when like, historically seen pistols didn't exist, hey, you still have a little pistol.
Right.
And I just think, there weren't any sorts of pistols in that era. Unless I'm just completely unaware of it. And,
No.
They
just retconned it as being, like, secrets of the assassins and, Altair's, scripts or whatever.
And the gunpowder wasn't even invented there. That wasn't invented until Altair's time, until like the Chinese in the 7th century and stuff like that. Just short and simple, I would not like to see an Assassin's Creed game set in Egypt, as I think the story would be too boring, and I think there would be too many limitations.
Yeah. To keep it short for me, the same, like, the rumors have not got me too excited for the game. I heard some other rumors that they were planning on a trilogy for Egypt, Ancient Greece, and Ancient Rome. That I would like more, because I think there's at least a little bit more to work with. When it comes to Greece or Rome.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say Greece, but I would love to see Rome, and perhaps see relate to Ezio then. As we've already had one game set in Rome and everything, and kind of maybe see the roots of the Templars there, because the Templars were, from what I know, were giant around Rome in the in that whole period until like the fall of the Borgia. And then they kind of moved to London there, I guess, after that. We see that throughout AC 4 Black Flag, 3, and Syndicate. That could be great, actually. Kind of see
the thing. Yeah, the thing. Oh,
yeah.
Go on. Sorry.
No problem. I was finished.
The thing with Assassin's Creed settings and locations is almost through all the games, the settings and time periods they've chosen are ones that have had a big impact on the world and on the locations themselves. Like a small maybe exception would be Rogue, but even that is somewhat relevant and was a smaller game. The rest, the French Revolution, the Renaissance, all these had a major impact. And in a couple of games, they're just going to run out of things that were relevant worldwide. And it's part of the reason why maybe, the Eastern Asian settings weren't chosen yet, or games weren't developed for those yet, because they had less of a worldwide effect.
That's also it. I've also heard a lot about and actually just talking about locations and everything. Let's not get too much into that, because I can actually announce to the listeners of this episode that the next episode is going to be all about that, and it's actually already recorded from when this episode here is being recorded. But we might as well get you ready, audience. So actually, let's just talk quickly about it. I also guess, one of the things that have been, from what I know, highly requested by the community, at least some members of the community, is, set in Japan or China.
Right.
Is a game set there. And I'm not overly fond of it, but I'd rather like to see that like going way back to ancient Egypt. And, of course we can also always just stay in Europe and USA and stuff like that. But I also think Assassin's Creed, just so it also feels original, we need to expand beyond our familiar locations.
Yeah.
As boring as it may be.
They try to do that somewhat with the Chronicle games, like China and India.
India, and
those
Russia.
Are full, Assassin's Creed games.
That's actually it. They were just like minor games, 2D games.
Yeah.
I know.
One thing I will though. I also do not like the idea of a game set in Japan. I think the idea of it is overhyped in the community and just in the general audience.
I don't think
an actual game there would be underwhelming. And neither do I, prefer like Egypt. One thing I will say this though, and this sort of connects back to the first question of the episode. I would love to see, after seeing the Assassin's Creed movie, I would love to see a game about Aguilar from the movie set in Spain, because the amount of screen time he got, he deserved more. I think he was the best character in that movie, and there's a lot to work with. He's a cool character, cool time period, and would just love a Spanish Inquisition game when, other than,
and that
Japan.
Could also relate to Assassin's Creed 2. We could even see Ezio in there, kind of like we did in a mission with him, kind of like we did in Liberation. Then you accompany Connor on a mission. That could be great. I'm forgetting something I wanted to say. Yeah, that's just it. It's a good question. With all these things, and I forgot what I was gonna say, but it probably wasn't important. Right. Now, do you have more to this, or shall we slowly wrap this up then?
Not really.
Right. And I guess there's more to all this, but we can say that for another episode. Then this is also getting kind of lengthy, so right. I want to thank everyone then for watching and listening to this episode of The Memory Corridor, and I hope every single one of you enjoyed listening to me and Irakli discuss this topic as much as we enjoyed discussing it. To stay up to date on everything The Memory Corridor and more things Assassin's Creed, like my Assassin's Creed photography I call #Creedography, links to my Twitter and Instagram will be in the description below should you be interested in checking that out, along with links to Irakli's Twitter, as I said in the beginning of the episode. Now, if you guys have any feedback and or topic ideas for the show here, feel more than free to share them with me in the comments section below, as it will probably go a long way in the process of making these episodes, not only for myself, but possibly for you wonderful listeners as well. Now, once again, thanks times infinity for watching and listening, everyone. I hope to see all of you again for future episodes, and until those come out, stay safe, everyone, and keep this amazing community what it is. And finally, also huge thanks to Mr. Irakli for guest starring on the episode. I hope you enjoyed discussing this with me, and I hope to see you as a guest another time. And
thanks for having me, man.
Blast having you, and thanks once again. And that sums it up for this episode of the Memory Corridor. Stay safe and active, everyone. See you later, assassins. Peace. Insieme per la vittoria.